Hey guys, tonight we will unveil the secret of the heaviest crown in history. This is the story of Elizabeth I, whose life was both a brilliant epic and a quiet eulogy. She was a product of betrayal, born from a marriage that ended with the axe, and learned to forge her childhood fear into steel. She didn't just rule an empire, she transformed herself into a work of political art, forced to wear toxic lead makeup as a mask of immortality, making people worship her while simultaneously poisoning her own heart and skin. Elizabeth I did not marry any man. She married the throne, and traded supreme glory for the fate of dying alone an eternal queen, but never a complete woman. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you now. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the year 1533, Princess Elizabeth was born at Whitehall Palace amid the chaos of the Tudor court. At that moment, every eye was fixed on the sumptuous silk-draped cradle. Yet instead of unreserved joy, the hall quickly filled with anxious sighs and whispered rumours. Her father, King Henry VIII, who always claimed to be God's ambassador on earth, appeared more disappointed than delighted at the birth of a daughter rather than a son, the one true hopeful heir to the dynasty. Her mother, Queen Anne Boleyn, once celebrated across Europe for her wit and beauty, had become the most hated woman on the continent for her inability to bear a son, a charge that many ladies-in-waiting quietly labelled witchcraft. The baptism took place with full pomp on June 26th, 1 week after the little princess's third birthday. But the pageantry soon revealed its hollowness. Hundreds of courtiers from high ministers to lowly servants lined the entrance, smiling as brightly as blossoms, yet furtively glancing at one another and murmuring, "The king wanted a prince, and here is only a princess," or "She seems healthy enough, but what use is she for the succession?" Trumpets blared and bells rang, but behind the curtains the mocking whispers made the ceremony taste bitter. Tiny Elizabeth, weighing under 2 kilograms, unintentionally became the half-princess in the eyes of the court. She received exquisitely tailored silk gowns, a soft sheepskin shawl, and a string of pearls. Yet these gifts served only as a cocoon trapping her in uncertainty. Over the next 2 years, Anne Boleyn not only faced mounting pressure to produce a son, but was also accused of flirting with another man, tried for witchcraft and treason, and on May 19th, 1536, was led to the block at the Tower of London, leaving behind her 3-year-old daughter who could scarcely comprehend loss. Immediately after her mother's death, Elizabeth was sent to live at a country manor, a place devoid of chapel bells or the laughter of courtly ladies. There she shared quarters with a devoted team of tutors who taught her difficult Latin before even showing her how to write her own name, then advanced her to classical Greek, an education considered a luxury among many nobles of the day. In that small room, light filtering through velvet drapes, Elizabeth quietly devoured every grammatical rule. The rhythmic scratch of her quill lulled her into a dreamlike state, where she found peace amid the political storm beyond her window. Outside the corridors, ladies-in-waiting and courtiers continued to gossip. "This princess is nothing but a burden to the realm." What was the king thinking, parading his daughter before everyone? Their whispers cut into her tender heart like invisible knives. Yet the 3-year-old still enjoyed material comforts: fragrant feather pillows, intricately carved wooden dolls, and a bed upholstered in the finest silk. But that fleeting happiness proved as ephemeral as a dream. King Henry VIII, quick to grow bored and quick to remarry within months of grief, wed Jane Seymour in November of that same year. The image of the lost child in the royal household grew ever clearer. Elizabeth awoke each morning in empty chambers. Her silk gowns felt less like princely attire and more like weights to be shed. She quietly obeyed her tutor's lessons, gathering fragments of knowledge to shield her spirit from panic. Each day she wondered, will I ever be called a true queen? Or will I remain this half-princess forever? In that endless loneliness, Elizabeth began to erect an unshakable wall of learning. She sensed that only knowledge would endure, while crowns and parental affection could shift with every political marriage. Thus, from those earliest days in exile, the half-princess sowed the seeds of an ambition to reshape her fate, so that one day soon she would stand atop the pinnacle of power and astonish all who had doubted her. At 2 years old, Elizabeth watched her mother's execution on May 19th, 1536, and the memory of that brutal day buried itself deep in her soul. The sharp clatter of the executioner's axe echoed in her mind like a dreadful lullaby, and the sight of Anne Boleyn's final shudder forever marked Elizabeth with a shadow of loss. Almost at once, she was sent away to a country estate outside the court, where the only companions she had were a rotating cast of unmarried tutors who followed her every step. Yet in that enforced exile, Elizabeth discovered her true strength, her mind. Before she could even sign her own name, she absorbed Latin grammar as though it were lullabies sung to soothe her fears. By the age of 3, she was quietly decoding the verses of the Psalms and reading the myths of ancient Greece for comfort, as if each line of Homer or Virgil were bricks in a shield wall, blocking out the shame and insecurity that threatened to overrun her young heart. Her father, King Henry VIII, remained entirely preoccupied with securing a male heir. Elaborate tournaments of pageantry, and grand coronation ceremonies for each successive queen consumed his attention, and he never once paused to acknowledge the little princess, who might, in another world, have been his joy. When her half-brother, Prince Edward, was born on October 12, 1537, the entire court erupted in jubilation. Trumpets blared, banners waved in every courtyard, and London's streets flooded with revellers. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, still not quite 4 years old, was treated no better than a piece of decorative parchment, ordered to learn her lessons, stand quietly, and then be forgotten when the next spectacle came calling. But Elizabeth did not drown in bitterness. Instead, she seized knowledge as her salvation. Every rule of Latin syntax she mastered was another layer of armour. Every recited verse of Ovid or Cicero was a brick in the fortress she built around her vulnerability. Tutors, many of whom had first been assigned to teach the future Queen of France or Spain, found themselves captivated by this small girl's prodigious appetite for learning, and they trembled slightly too, because in Tudor England, an educated woman was a perilous thing. Quick wit and sharp reasoning could be labelled witchcraft, almost as easily as failing to produce a son. So Elizabeth mastered another skill, the art of seeming harmless. She perfected a gentle, unassuming smile that suggested innocence, while her eyes, glittering with curiosity, remained watchful. She learned to speak only when spoken to bow her head in courtly fashion, and to laugh quietly at harmless jokes so that no one would suspect she was listening for threats. In that half-hidden life, she practiced silence as diligently as she practiced declension tables. Despite the bitterness of exile, those early years became Elizabeth's most rigorous training. She never forgot the damp, musty smell of parchment pages in the tutor's study, nor the creak of dry leaves under her feet as she walked the gravel paths of the manor's gardens. She learned to find solace in the hush of dawn, when mist lay thick over the lawns, and the only sound was her own measured breathing. Every afternoon she would sit by a leaded wooden window, gazing toward the distant spires of London, imagining that one day the Tudor tragedy would become her own grand stage. In those quiet hours, Elizabeth wove dreams of destiny. She pictured herself stepping out of scholarly solitude and onto a dais where the court's laughter would fall silent, where the proudest dukes and duchesses would look on in astonishment as she, once the dismissed half-princess, claimed her place at the centre of power. And though sleep often claimed her as she traced notes in her copy of Virgil's Aeneid, her heart beat awake with the resolve that knowledge alone would make her invincible. Thus, in the enforced calm of that country home, beneath the drab cloak of an exiled child, Elizabeth Tudor quietly constructed the foundation of her future reign, a mind so formidable that no whisper of gossip could tear it down, and a resolve so steadfast that even the fiercest storm of court intrigue would only drive her deeper into her studies and closer to the throne that awaited her. In the year 1547, on January 28th, King Henry VIII passed away, and at news of his death, the young princess did not shed a single tear. To her, Henry existed only as the stern visage in his portrait hanging high in the palace, his love for her no more than a shadow between brushstrokes. When her half-brother, Prince Edward, ascended the throne as King Edward VI on February 16th, She was 14 years old and remained an uninvited guest in the royal household. Yet in the quiet chambers of her heart, Elizabeth believed that one day her moment would come. Shortly thereafter, Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth wife, extended an unexpected invitation. On March 23rd, the new queen welcomed Elizabeth back to court as her foster daughter. Elizabeth, hopeful at last for a mother's care, arrived at Hampton Court with cautious anticipation. But the palace corridors concealed a different reality. Catherine's new husband, Thomas Seymour, arrived soon after their marriage on April 27th, and he took an unsettling interest in the young princess. In the still dawns and dusky evenings, Seymour would slip quietly into Elizabeth's room, his footsteps muffled against the heavy tapestries. He would pluck at the hems of her gowns, or poke his head around the door to tickle her shoulder as she lay half asleep. At first the court treated it as mere childish mischief, an amusing eccentricity of a restless nobleman. Yet Elizabeth, with her newfound acuity for nuance, detected danger in the faint scent of expensive perfume he always wore. One fateful afternoon in April of 1548, Catherine Parr discovered Elizabeth and Thomas Seymour together in an embrace that could be construed as far too familiar. Whether they had merely been standing too close or engaged in something more compromising, whispers spread swiftly through the palace like wildfire. Seymour was promptly arrested and indicted for treason. In the glare of public scandal, Elizabeth's name was dragged into the dirty mire she was accused of encouraging his advances. A special commission of the Privy Council convened to investigate. Courtiers and ladies-in-waiting were summoned to testify. Letters were seized and scrutinized, and Elizabeth herself was questioned as though she were the prime conspirator. Yet she had learned the first rule of survival at court: feign ignorance. She repeated, in a composed and absolutely innocent manner, that she had no recollection of any improper conduct. She knew nothing, as her father had often counselled in times of crisis. Her performance was so artful that the council, lacking concrete evidence, ultimately cleared her of all wrongdoing. Elizabeth emerged, wholly innocent, spared the block by the razor's edge of her own crafted naivete. Though her name was officially absolved, the stain of the scandal clung to her like a shadow she could never fully outrun. The court's laughter felt colder thereafter, and every sideways glance reminded her of how swiftly a girl's reputation could be torn to shreds by a man's ambition. From that day onward, Elizabeth understood a fundamental truth. Power is not granted to the weak or the unwary, and a single misstep could cost her everything. In the months that followed, she kept a safe distance from all but her most trusted tutors. Burying herself once again in books and study, she promised herself that no one would ever again control her fate by manipulating her vulnerability. The lesson had been cruel, but it forged in her a steely resolve. She thanked God, in her quiet prayers, that she had lived through the ordeal unbroken, and she vowed to remain ever watchful of those who claimed to be her protectors. Thus, at 15 years old, Elizabeth returned to her daily routine of lessons, omitting no detail in her Latin exercises, memorizing every nuance of Greek syntax, and rehearsing her diction before the long mirror in her chamber. Her canopy bed and silk draperies now felt like the trappings of a fortress. Each soft pillow and ornate tapestry served as a reminder that knowledge, not affection, would be her true safeguard. Night after night, she lay awake beneath the blazing stars, pondering the precariousness of royal favour and the indifference of fate. And so Elizabeth emerged from the Seymour scandal, not as the trembling child who had first arrived at court, but as a young woman tempered by trial, her spirit sharpened like a blade. In those days of whispered accusations and veiled threats, she learned that the only power she could fully claim was the power of her own mind, and that, above all else, would be the legacy she carried into her future reign. When King Edward VI died on July 6, 1553, England trembled at the prospect of a Catholic monarch's return. Mary Tudor, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, ascended the throne on July 19th and was hailed by many as the rightful queen. For 3 days the court celebrated her coronation with fanfare so resounding that London's bells seemed to ring eternity itself. Yet almost as quickly as the cheers died down, Mary unleashed a brutal persecution of the kingdom's Protestants, an act that would later earn her the grim moniker, Bloody Mary. Amid this upheaval, Princess Elizabeth, at 19 years old, skillfully kept her silence. She was no longer the sheltered child exiled at a country manor, but still not fully trusted within the inner circles of power. She watched from behind the velvet curtains of court, careful never to speak too loudly or reveal an opinion that might betray her Protestant sympathies. Though her faith lay with the reformers, Elizabeth understood that in Mary's England, open dissent could be a death sentence. But no one is immune to intrigue at the Tudor court. In November of 1553, Elizabeth was falsely accused of involvement in a plot to overthrow Queen Mary. Sources differ on the precise date of her arrest, but contemporary records place her confinement in the Tower of London by late November, just months after Mary's ascension. The same stone walls that had witnessed her mother's execution now enclosed her in chilling silence. In those damp, torchlit corridors, the ghosts of her past seemed to whisper warnings through the mortar. Behind her iron-barred window, Elizabeth set pen to paper and composed letters of supplication to Queen Mary, begging for clemency. She addressed her half-sister with a mixture of humility and veiled dignity, acknowledging Mary's authority even as she pleaded for mercy. Though Mary had ordered the execution of over 200 Protestants by burning at the stake, a staggering toll that darkened her first year on the throne, she remained Elizabeth's only hope for survival. Weeks passed under the shadow of the scaffold, the executioner's block looming at the other end of the tower's courtyard. Elizabeth imagined the crack of the axe as a prelude to her own doom, yet she refused to let fear steal her composure. She wrote to Mary with a solemn promise of loyalty and a veiled reminder of their shared blood. "Most gracious sister, I do humbly beseech your Majesty's clemency." Out of a mix of political expedience and faint familial pity, Mary granted her youngest sister a pardon in late December of 1553. On December 22nd, Elizabeth was released from confinement, her legs unsteady as she stepped once more into daylight. She carried away a lesson carved deep into her memory, that a woman's reputation could vanish at a whispered accusation, and that no alliance, royal or otherwise, could fully protect her from the caprices of male power. From that moment on, Elizabeth dedicated herself to the art of self-preservation. She observed the courtiers as one might study a complicated tapestry, tracing every subtle thread of allegiance and betrayal. She learned when to remain mute, even when her heart ached to speak, and when to offer just enough courtesy to disarm suspicion. Her practiced courtesy became legendary. A polite inclination of the head here, a gentle half-smile there. Each gesture measured to convey innocence without weakness. She also sharpened her intellect as a weapon. In her private chambers, Elizabeth continued her rigorous study of classical texts, immersing herself in the writings of Aristotle on statecraft and Plutarch's biographies of famous leaders. She knew that knowledge was both a shield and a sword. A well-chosen phrase, uttered at the right moment, could redirect a conversation before it veered into dangerous territory. And so she stocked her mind with quotes and clever retorts, prepared to deflect any insinuation that might threaten her standing. By enduring public humiliation and the terror of Tower imprisonment, Elizabeth internalized a fundamental truth. Vigilance is a woman's greatest armor in a world ruled by men. She developed an almost supernatural sense for detecting disloyalty, noticing the slightest hesitation in a courtier's bow or the faintest tremor in a servant's voice. When approached with flattering praise, she practiced a neutral expression, withholding both thanks and rebuke until she judged the speaker's true motives. In the evenings, when the court's music and laughter drifted down the corridors, Elizabeth would sit by her window, gazing at the dark Thames River. The moonlight shimmered on the water like silver foil, and she would allow herself a moment of weary reflection. She had survived the Tower, outlasted her mother's tragic fate, and learned the rigors of Tudor power. Yet she remained restless, knowing that true security lay not in any crown or title, but in the unassailable fortress of her own mind. Thus, Elizabeth emerged from Mary's reign not as a broken princess, but as a subtly formidable presence. She had mastered the roles of silent observer and cautious diplomat, and her reputation, though once nearly destroyed, was now tempered by experience. The world beyond the Tower awaited her fully prepared, a young woman of 20 years, armed not with armies, but with an unwavering resolve to protect herself by wit and wisdom, and to ensure that no one, ever again, could shatter her name with a single whispered rumour. In 1558, on November 17th, Queen Mary Tudor breathed her last at St. James's Palace, and 25-year-old Elizabeth ascended the throne as the new sovereign. Yet what she inherited was far from a gilded legacy. England's coffers lay nearly empty after 2 decades of lavish spending and religious turmoil. The realm itself stood divided. Roughly half the population remained loyal to the Catholic Church, while the other half embraced the Protestant Reformation Elizabeth's brother, Edward VI, had advanced. In such a brittle balance, even the smallest misstep threatened to plunge the kingdom into open civil war. The coronation ceremony that followed on January 15, 1559, was sumptuous in outward appearance. Gold banners fluttered, trumpets sounded, and the streets of Westminster overflowed with cheering crowds. Yet Elizabeth, standing beneath the heavy jewelled crown, felt none of the jubilation. She understood all too well that no ceremony could wash away the burdens she now carried: an empty treasury, a rift in national conscience, and an uninhibited aristocracy eager to fill the power vacuum. Almost immediately, foreign diplomats began to whisper of marriage alliances. France offered princes of the Valois house. Spain, no less insistent, pressed King Philip's claim by virtue of his previous marriage to Mary. Even Robert Dudley, her childhood friend and gentleman of the royal household, sent fervent, veiled offers of affection, hoping to marry the Queen and thus claim authority. Elizabeth knew these messages were less about companionship and more about control. Marriage meant surrendering her autonomy to a husband who would rule by right of his queen consort's crown. But Elizabeth had witnessed the tragic fate such unions could bring. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, had lost her head. Her half-sister, Mary Tudor, had earned the moniker Bloody Mary through religious persecution. Henry VIII's other queens had also met grisly ends. She understood that marriage, for a Tudor woman, was a perilous contract. So she turned her singleness into an instrument of statecraft. She dangled the prospect of union before foreign courts, only to gracefully withdraw each suitor at the last moment, leaving them hopeful but unmapped by her hand. She promised an heir she would never bear, allowing every great power to imagine a future with England at its side, yet never granting any the ultimate prize. Behind that mask of regal detachment, Elizabeth devoted herself to the subtle art of governance. She pored over the scant records of the royal finances, counting each remaining coin as though it were a precious relic. Treasury reports showed less than £500,000 in the exchequer, an astonishingly low sum for an empire embroiled in foreign wars. Every decision to fund the navy, support a Protestant faction in Europe, or host a diplomatic banquet was weighed against that critical number. At council meetings, she observed the manner in which her ministers presented their arguments, the flicker of ambition behind polite deference, the tremor of fear when her gaze fell upon them. She learned the precise moment to interject a single word of approval, to express a soft doubt, or to remain silent until the tension broke. These micro-gestures became her most powerful tools. A softly delivered "indeed" or a gentle nod could redirect a debate without raising a voice. Her courtiers began to describe her smile as saintly, unaware that behind those calm lips lay a mind sharper than any blade. Every policy announcement was the result of meticulous planning. When granting a charter to maintain the Royal Navy, she instructed her secretaries to frame the decree not as a display of power, but as a necessary act of national self-preservation. When negotiating with French envoys over trading agreements, she insisted on wording that protected English merchants first, then extended generosity as a courtesy to her hosts. No one left her presence feeling openly offended, yet each party departed convinced they had won her favour. For Elizabeth, the throne was never a path to personal freedom. It was an unending performance, an obligation to project perfection, even as she grappled with exhaustion and loneliness. She rose each dawn to resume her role, the immutable queen, flawless in public, even as her private chambers echoed with the rustle of pages and the ticking of clocks measuring out her vigil. She rehearsed her speeches in the hush before sunrise, pacing the red floorcloth of her bedchamber, long after her ladies had slipped into their own morning prayers. By candlelight she studied the works of statecraft and classical history: Tacitus on the perils of tyranny, Aristotle on the balance of power, Plutarch's lives of illustrious leaders, so that her counsel would bear the weight of wisdom. She believed that knowledge was the surest safeguard against betrayal. A well-placed quotation in council might secure loyalty. An unexpected reply could forestall a rumoured coup. Thus armed, she navigated the labyrinth of factional ambition with quiet confidence. And so Elizabeth's early reign was defined by this duality, the public display of regal solemnity set against the private crucible of constant vigilance. Her unmarried status remained her greatest diplomatic weapon, and her intellect, once dismissed as a curiosity, became the firm foundation of her authority. In the hush of night, as she lay beneath silken sheets, she knew that her true freedom was bound up in the unbreakable discipline of her own mind, an eternal performance, without intermission, upon which the fate of England depended. Elizabeth ascended the throne amid a tempest, a kingdom rent by religious schism, a treasury drained to less than £500,000, and an aristocracy of aging peers who saw a queen more as a lady of the manor than as a sovereign. She soon grasped a paradox. Her greatest power lay not in her title, but in the illusion of the invincible queen. Each morning, Elizabeth transformed herself into a living canvas of authority. Her hair, piled into a towering wig often reaching 2 feet in height, was powdered white to match her chalk-thick lead-based cosmetics. She applied her foundation with deliberate precision, an act that, though it burned and cracked her skin, signified unending youth. Her gowns, layered with stiffened petticoats and embroidered with gold thread and precious stones, weighed upwards of 30 pounds, but their very weight declared her unassailable status. Every accessory, necklaces of pearls, sleeves of velvet, fans of ostrich feather, served as a silent proclamation. The queen cannot age, cannot falter, cannot yield. Within the court's inner circle, a halo of both fear and admiration surrounded her. Courtiers and servants would approach with measured steps, mindful that any sudden movement might startle the sovereign whose word could mean favour or ruin. Elizabeth was expected to smile through the stinging crackle of her makeup, stand unflinching under the glare of foreign ambassadors, and navigate every social nuance without betraying an emotion that could be interpreted as weakness. Her secret to diplomatic success rested on a subtle art of promise without delivery. She let hope blossom in French embassies, Spanish delegations, and even in the eager eyes of Robert Dudley, her childhood friend, only to withdraw gracefully at the last moment. This tactic kept every suitor invested, but never in control. Behind the layers of powder and protocol, Elizabeth lived in profound solitude. Her ladies-in-waiting whispered behind lace fans, and ambassadors diligently recorded every tilt of her head, every arch of her eyebrow in their dispatches home. She understood that a faint frown or the slightest sneeze could be transformed into political rumour by supper. In that hush of perpetual observation, she found a rare confidant in Robert Dudley. He was the one person who could see beyond the mask a friendship formed in their youth, tempered by shared memories of exile and peril. Yet even that refuge proved fragile. On September 8, 1560, Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, died unexpectedly in Norfolk, an event that fueled scandalous whispers through Westminster and beyond. Was it accident, suicide, or something far darker? London's pamphlets hummed with the question, and courtiers began to look at Elizabeth and Dudley with suspicion. The Queen, torn between personal affection and the necessities of rule, knew she must maintain distance. In the world of Tudor politics, a queen's love was a hazard no less lethal than poison. So Elizabeth resealed her private chamber, turning once more to her books and papers for solace. She no longer trusted even the closest gaze. The corridors echoed to the footsteps of her guards, her study to the scratch of her quill on parchment. Each night, after the ceremonial duties and audiences had ended, she extinguished every candle but one, and sat alone by the dying embers of the hearth. She would allow herself a moment of weakness, a whispered name, a flicker of tears before recalling the harsh lesson that personal desires must yield to the demands of the crown. Thus, in her mid-20s, Elizabeth embodied the delicate balance between spectacle and strategy. She wore her weighty robes like armor, and wielded her solitude like a shield. Her smile remained serene, her eyes alert, and her posture unbroken even when her heart ached. Every morning's ritual of makeup and costume was a reminder that her reign required more performance than any stage in England. To her court, she was the unaging queen. To herself, she was a vigilant actor, determined that no private longing would ever again be exploited to undermine her authority. In that exquisite tension between public perfection and private exile, Elizabeth's strength and her ultimate triumph would be forged. The greatest danger to Queen Elizabeth was not from foreign enemies, but from her own family. Mary Stuart, Mary, Queen of Scots, loomed over Elizabeth's reign like a persistent spectre for nearly 2 decades. As the granddaughter of Margaret Tudor, Mary bore Tudor blood, yet she remained a devout Catholic. To many English Protestants, she became the figurehead of rebellion, the living embodiment of papal ambition on English soil. Elizabeth could neither release Mary outright, fearing that her cousin might flee to Spain or the Papal States to rally armies, nor simply expel her from England, which would risk diplomatic rupture with Scotland and Catholic Europe. Instead, beginning in May of 1568, Mary was confined to what amounted to royal exile. She was housed in various castles, first at Carlisle, then Bolton, Tutbury, and finally Fotheringhay, living with the trappings of royalty, sumptuous meals, embroidered gowns, and a retinue of attendants. Yet behind the velvet curtains and ornate tapestries, her every move was watched. Every letter she wrote was intercepted and scrutinized by Elizabeth's vast intelligence network. Tensions reached a crescendo with the discovery of the Babington plot in August of 1586. A group of conspirators, led by Anthony Babington, conspired by letter to abduct Elizabeth, place Mary on the English throne, and re-establish Catholicism as the state religion. Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, had already infiltrated Mary's secret correspondence. When the ink was barely dry on those treasonous letters, Sicily's informants delivered copies to Elizabeth's council. Faced with incontrovertible evidence, Elizabeth confronted an agonizing choice between family loyalty and the security of the realm. She knew that Mary's guilt, or at least the perception of it, rendered her a perpetual threat. The Privy Council urged swift justice, warning that, should Mary remain free, the kingdom will never rest. Elizabeth, torn between sisterly affection and sovereign duty, ultimately signed the death warrant on December 8, 1586, with a heavy hand. "I do not strike this blow with joy," she is said to have confessed in a trembling moment, "but for the throne's defence I must." Mary's execution on February 8, 1587, at Fotheringhay Castle, was carried out with grim formality. As the axe fell, the political landscape shifted decisively in Elizabeth's favour. Catholic plots faltered, and Spanish designs on England temporarily lost momentum. Yet for Elizabeth, the victory tasted of ashes. The woman who had once shared her childhood, who had written to her most gracious sister in hopes of mercy, was now gone. In that instant, Elizabeth lost the last living person who truly understood the burdens of royal blood. The price of power, Elizabeth discovered, is an indelible loneliness and an abiding sense of guilt. She did not rejoice at Mary's death. Instead, she felt a profound fear. Mary had been the only soul to witness the Queen's private pleas for clemency, the only one who had seen Elizabeth not in coronation robes, but as a frightened child. If even a Tudor princess's bond could be severed by politics, Elizabeth realized that trust was a fragile currency in royal life. From that moment onward, Elizabeth resolved to transform her authority into a deadly strength that none would dare challenge. She redoubled her efforts to cultivate an image of unbreakable resolve. In council, she spoke with measured calm. In public, she projected serene authority. She entrusted her security to a network of loyal spies and guarded her private self with meticulous care. No one, she vowed, would ever again wield her personal vulnerability as a weapon against her. And so Elizabeth's reign entered its mature phase, a complex choreography of power, image, and solitude. The execution of her cousin left a scar deeper than any political wound. But it also steeled her resolve, compelling the Queen to wield her sovereignty with a precision both formidable and unsparing. In the hush that followed Mary's final breath, Elizabeth embraced the solitary mantle of power, ever watchful, ever aware that in the perilous world of Tudor politics, mercy and authority were inseparable, and that true safety lay only in the unassailable fortress of her own unyielding will. In the year 1588, a grave peril descended upon England's shores. King Philip II of Spain, once Elizabeth's brother-in-law, and notorious for his fits of spite, mustered an immense fleet to restore Catholic dominance to England. This armada of 130 heavily armed galleons set sail from Lisbon in May of that year, each vessel bristling with cannon ports and carrying soldiers trained for boarding actions. The mere rumour of its approach sent ripples of panic through Elizabeth's court. Despite the fear that rippled across the realm, Elizabeth maintained a studied calm. She knew that morale was as crucial as muskets or cannon fire. On August 1st, in the fields near Tilbury, she donned silver breastplate and helmet, mounted her grey stallion, and rode before a gathered host of some 15,000 militiamen and soldiers under the sweltering late summer Sunday. In a clear, measured voice, she delivered what would become the legendary Tilbury speech. "I know I have the body but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." Though the declaration rang with resolute defiance, Elizabeth's hand trembled slightly on the reins, a reminder that even the boldest words are hollow without fortune on one side. Fortune, or something very like it, arrived in the form of tempestuous weather. As Philip's armada neared the English Channel in late July, a sudden gale swept across the sea. The massive Spanish fleet, ill-prepared for the tumultuous conditions, found its heavy ships hard to maneuver. Many vessels were battered by towering waves, the rigging torn apart by the wind. By August 8th, the English navy, smaller but more agile, struck swiftly, engaging in hit-and-run tactics that capitalized on the Spaniards' disarray. Over the next week, dozens of Spanish ships foundered or were driven ashore. Historical accounts estimate that by the time the Armada limped back north around the northern coast of Scotland on August 28th, at least 50 ships had been lost to storm or skirmish, and thousands of sailors had perished. In London, the news of victory spread with electrifying speed. Bells rang in every parish church, bonfires were lit on hilltops, and citizens poured into the streets in wild celebration. Yet Elizabeth, even as she addressed her people with a dignified composure, carried a heavy heart. The triumph, she knew, owed as much to the fury of the English Channel as to her own strategy. Moreover, the damage to her navy was severe. Several of her own ships had sustained critical damage, and the cost of repairs threatened to drain the exchequer further. England's treasury, already depleted by ongoing wars in Ireland and subsidies to Protestant allies, found itself stretched perilously thin. Furthermore, the Armada's defeat did little to mend the deep religious rifts within the country. Although Protestant pride soared, many Catholics remained wary, and some even clandestinely welcomed the Spanish attempt. Elizabeth recognized that military victory, while vital, was only one piece of the puzzle. The true security of her realm required vigilance and deft diplomacy. Thus, Elizabeth wasted no time in consolidating her gains. She intensified the work of her intelligence network, led by Sir Francis Walsingham, ensuring that spies and informants across Europe fed her reports on Catholic plots in France, the Spanish Netherlands, and the Papal States. She supported the refitting and expansion of her navy, authorizing the construction of 10 new vessels by the spring of 1589, each optimized for speed and armed with up-to-date artillery. At the same time, Elizabeth reinforced alliances with Protestant powers. She quietly funneled funds to the Dutch rebels fighting in the Netherlands, an expenditure that would amount to some £60,000 by year's end to keep Spanish forces off balance. She nurtured relations with up-and-coming Protestant princes in the Holy Roman Empire, exchanging letters that mixed personal courtesy with veiled warnings against any Catholic resurgence. Every policy decision in the months following the Armada was a carefully placed move in what amounted to a Cold War of religion. Elizabeth balanced her public reassurance of domestic stability with covert actions aimed at undermining her enemies abroad. She allowed a trickle of exiled Catholic priests to remain under surveillance, hoping to reveal their networks, while issuing pardons to lesser conspirators to sow confusion among Catholic factions. Even as she governed, Elizabeth never again uttered the words she spoke at Tilbury in public. She understood that the true measure of leadership lay not in stirring speeches, but in the unrelenting, often unseen work of statecraft. She remained on constant alert for threats, always mindful that Spain or some other power might seek revenge. Night after night she reviewed maps and dispatches in her privy chamber by the light of a single candle, tracing currents of European politics with a weary but unwavering gaze. By the end of 1588, England had weathered its greatest naval crisis, but the victory came at a high cost. The realm was safe for now, but the war of faith and power pressed on. Yet Elizabeth's leadership through the Armada crisis solidified her reputation as a sovereign who could combine dramatic public moments with precise, patient diplomacy. And though the thunder of cannon and the roar of celebration had faded, the quiet hum of her government's machinery continued its whirs, and clicks a testament to a queen who knew that the art of rulership was never-ending, and that true victories often lay in the careful orchestration of countless, invisible decisions. In addition to foreign threats, Elizabeth's greatest peril lay within her own palace walls. Early in her reign, she entrusted Sir Francis Walsingham, appointed Principal Secretary in 1573, with the task of building an intricate intelligence network often called Her Majesty's Secret Service. By 1588, Walsingham oversaw nearly 100 agents embedded across Europe and within England itself. Courtiers, ladies-in-waiting, musicians, even priests could be informants. Every tapestry, every velvet curtain might conceal a listening ear. Under Elizabeth's direction, subtlety became paramount. Agents learned to speak in code, hide letters in willow trunks, and smuggle messages within wax tablets. The Queen herself mastered the art of knowing without revealing knowledge, turning the very act of surveillance into a weapon that disarmed her enemies before they knew they were discovered. Elizabeth complemented her spy network with a campaign of visual propaganda. She summoned the finest portraitists of her day, Nicholas Hilliard, Lavina Teerlink, and George Gower, to craft images of the immortal Queen. Beginning in 1581, Hilliard produced over a dozen versions of Elizabeth's mask, each stripping away wrinkles and shadows, rendering her face as smooth and reflective as alabaster. These portraits circulated through court and continental courts alike, reinforcing the myth of a perpetual, untouchable sovereign. Embroidered hangings and statues went further, presenting Elizabeth as an almost divine figure, an icon of timeless authority. Domestically, Elizabeth wielded a careful mix of ruthlessness and clemency. In 1586, after the discovery of the Babington plot, she ordered the public execution of Anthony Babington and 6 co-conspirators on September 15th, their heads displayed on London Bridge as a grim warning. Yet, in the same year, she pardoned lesser offenders whose involvement was tenuous, releasing them quietly from the Tower. This strategic mercy fostered loyalty among wavering nobles, while the harsh spectacle of justice deterred would-be traitors. Over her 44-year reign, official records show that Elizabeth signed some 150 death warrants fewer, by comparison, than her half-sister Mary had condemned in 3 years. The message was clear. Loyalty would be rewarded, betrayal would be punished, but the Crown's mercy was as real as its might. Life at court thus became an endless play, a perpetual performance in which Elizabeth was both actress and director. At morning levees, she greeted her Privy Council with a practiced warmth. At afternoon audiences, she listened patiently to foreign ambassadors. By candlelight, she reviewed maps and dispatches in her privy chamber. All the while, she remained acutely aware that behind every curtsy lay potential treachery, and behind every compliment, a hidden agenda. The fear of being unseated, of losing the crown she had fought so hard to secure, never left her. It drove her to maintain an unwavering vigilance, to sharpen her wits even as her skin grew fragile under layers of lead-based makeup, and to fortify her mind as resolutely as her navy defended her coasts. In this climate of watchful intrigue, Elizabeth found solace only in the certainty of her own intelligence. She learned to read the slightest quiver in a nobleman's voice, to discern conspiratorial whispers in the hush of a grand hall. When courtiers pressed too close, she countered with a gentle, inscrutable smile. When foreign envoys sought to outmaneuver her, she offered a courteous concession that left them off balance. Each choice was calculated to uphold her fragile authority while preserving the illusion of benevolence. Thus her court functioned as both theatre and battleground. Elizabeth moved through it as a queen should, stately, composed, unfaltering. Yet behind the scenes, she was what she had always been, a survivor of scandal, imprisonment, and exile, armed with the knowledge that in Tudor England, power belonged to those who could command not only armies, but information itself. And so, encircled by velvet robes and gilded portraits, she reigned atop a realm woven from shadows and whispers, trusting only in the quiet force of her vigilance and the deadly precision of her secret service. Old age crept upon Elizabeth with a profound solitude and a ravaging toll on her body. The very makeup that had once fashioned her ethereal visage, the thick white lead-based foundation, slowly poisoned her skin, causing chronic irritation and flaking that no amount of botanical salves could fully heal. Her once lustrous hair, styled in towering wigs to hide thinning locks, grew ever more fragile. each morning's application a painful reminder of time's inexorable march. By the winter of 1599, at 70 years old, Elizabeth's natural teeth had all but crumbled away, forcing her to rely on elaborate sets of false teeth carved from ivory and bone. Yet in every official portrait painted with meticulous care, even into the new century, she appeared ageless, a testament to the craftsmen who erased age under their brushes. Even her hands, those instruments of state, betrayed her. As she signed a crucial order on matters of finance or foreign policy, her quill hand would tremble visibly, the ink scarcely flowing smoothly across the vellum. Courtiers speculated in hushed tones, "Has Her Majesty grown frail?" But few dared ask the question openly, for Elizabeth's reputation for severity in secret councils remained undiminished. To speak of her mortality was to invite uncomfortable reminders that even the greatest monarch must one day yield to death. Throughout her long reign, Elizabeth had steadfastly refused to name a successor. Every whispered petition by bishops, privy councillors, or emissaries from distant courts was met with firm silence or a gracious smile. For Elizabeth, acknowledging an heir would have meant conceding her own mortality, a final act she could not bring herself to perform. Instead, she maintained the status quo. The crown remained hers alone, suspended above the earth until the moment she chose or was forced to descend from her throne. In the final hours of her life, Elizabeth donned the solemn vestments of mourning, a simple black gown trimmed in velvet, and a kerchief at her throat. She rejected entreaties from her ladies in waiting to rest, standing upright in her solar as though still expecting ambassadors to arrive. Her mind drifted through the corridors of memory, the face of her mother on the scaffold, the spectre of Thomas Seymour's promise, the heavy dread of the Babington plot, the cheering fields of Tilbury, and the silent halls filled with portraits of her ancestors. To these ghosts, Elizabeth spoke softly of duty and power, her voice a weary echo in the cavernous room. As strength ebbed from her frame, she sank slowly to the floor, her eyes fixed on the jewelled crown resting on its crimson cushion. For a final moment she permitted herself the smallest of smiles, a tender concession to irony. She had lived 44 years upon that throne, outlasting every rival and printer's broadside, transforming her virginity from liability to legend. In that stillness, she recognized that her greatest achievement was not a victory in battle nor a masterstroke of diplomacy, but the creation of a legacy woven from absence itself, a monument to a queen who needed no husband, whose solitude became the very foundation of her authority. When at last Elizabeth Tudor drew her final breath on March 24th, 1603, there was no triumphant fanfare to salute her passing. No trumpet sounded across the Thames, no cannon boomed from the Tower. Instead, a hush fell over the court, and the country alike a silence heavy with grief and uncertainty. The empty throne in Westminster Hall stood as a stark reminder that Elizabeth's singular presence had governed the fate of England for an entire generation. As courtiers crept away under darkened banners, the realm prepared to turn a page into a new era, carrying with it the enigmatic legacy of the Queen who became legend. Yet as Elizabeth mastered the high-stakes game of power, outwitting spies behind velvet curtains and crafting flawless public performances, she also cultivated a handful of intimate rituals unseen by most of her court. Behind the crown's gleam and the court's hushed intrigue lay a queen shaped as much by personal eccentricities as by statecraft. In the hushed hours between council meetings and midnight audiences, Elizabeth retreated into her private world, where 6 peculiar habits became her steadfast companions, a whispered testament to the solitary woman beneath the sovereign's mask. Strange habit number 1. Morning cold milk. Elizabeth maintained a morning ritual that even her longest-serving attendants whispered about. Each dawn, she drank 2 cups of freshly drawn cold milk from the royal dairy. That dairy lay approximately 5 miles from Whitehall Palace, where Jersey and Guernsey cows were tended with great care to ensure the milk was not only fresh, but richly creamy. The court physicians recorded meticulously that after the morning levee, Elizabeth was presented with 2 cups of milk, each cup about 1.5. Tudor gills chilled in a silver jug and placed on an ivory inlaid wooden tray. She believed this habit softened the skin and stabilized the heartbeat, while also helping to purge toxins accumulated during the night. Although microbiology and nutritional science were centuries away, Elizabeth clung to the conviction that milk drawn at about 5 o'clock in the morning when the lesser stars still faded in mist, contained the season's purest essence to cleanse the humours. In the royal records, a rare entry on the 15th of October, 1583, notes that she skipped her milk only once that entire year, owing to an overly crowded morning, and that her complexion then showed slight roughness, underscoring how seriously she took the ritual. Servants recalled that on mornings of thick fog, the dairy teams set out before first light, trudging through biting wind and mud to deliver the milk. On the 12th of January, 1592, a severe frost partially froze the milk within the leaded jug, yet Elizabeth sipped it little by little, seemingly unwilling to forsake her faith in it despite bones-chilling cold. The oddity lay not merely in drinking the milk, but in how she savoured it. Elizabeth added neither honey nor hartshorn, as many noble contemporaries did, permitting only the pure milk and its chill to touch her lips. Seated on a velvet-upholstered chair, candlelight flickering over the surface of the black oak table, she drank slowly in silence, as though each sip carried a magic that washed away fatigue and political burdens alike. Her soft sighs mingled with the gentle clink of the milk against the cup's rim, composing a sleepy symphony performed just for the Queen. After finishing, Elizabeth would glance through a 7-foot-high window, where the oaks in the palace courtyard had begun to turn amber in autumn. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaled the crisp air, then exhaled before opening her journal from the previous day where she recorded European news, treasury figures, and the list of ambassadors due at court. Clearly, the morning cold milk ritual served not only as bodily care, but as a ceremonial reset, refocusing her mind for the day ahead. For Elizabeth, those 2 cups of cold milk were a reminder of the purity and necessity of a clear beginning, unencumbered by lingering weariness or courtly intrigue. And though most of her attendants regarded the milk simply as a beverage, Elizabeth transformed it into a symbol of self-discipline, and of her determination to preserve her outward composure as an inviolable weapon. In a world of treachery and relentless pressure, where any moment could conceal a snare, Elizabeth's morning cold milk served as the lighthouse guiding her through the night of power. Strange habit number 2, quarterly vinegar bath. Elizabeth maintained another curious routine each quarter, a full-body soak in a tub filled with a blend of wine vinegar and aromatic herbs. Beginning in the spring of 1564, she designated the first day of January, April, July, and October as her renewal days. On each occasion, servants would prepare a large oak tub in the king's private apartments at Hampton Court. Into this tub, they poured 3 gallons of red wine vinegar, imported from the vineyards of Gascony, and steeped sprigs of rosemary, thyme, and lavender for at least 6 hours prior to the bath. By first light on the appointed day, Elizabeth would summon her ladies-in-waiting and enter the scented chamber, wearing only a shift of fine Holland linen. The tub, heated by embers wrapped in iron pans placed beneath it, maintained a lukewarm temperature of around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, just sufficient to open the pores without causing discomfort. Elizabeth would immerse herself up to her chin, her curls pinned high to avoid dampening her elaborate hairstyle. The vinegar's pungent aroma mingled with the herbal steam, creating an otherworldly haze in which the Queen reclined for exactly 30 minutes, timed by a silver hourglass inscribed with her monogram. Court records meticulously note that after each bath, on the very same day, Elizabeth's complexion appeared notably clearer, as though the vinegar had gently exfoliated the dead skin cells. Physicians of the day, educated in the 4 humour theory, believed the acidulated water drew out corruption from the humours and prevented pestilence. No matter that many servants felt their skin itch afterward, Elizabeth remained convinced that the ritual warded off hidden maladies and preserved her vitality against the dank draughts of the palace. On the 1st of January in 1578, a particularly harsh winter gale swept across the Thames, chilling the palace corridors. Yet Elizabeth insisted on her quarterly bath, dismissing the bracing wind as merely another trial to endure. When her ladies-in-waiting tried to delay the ceremony until the frost melted, she calmly replied, "One's body must be purified in all seasons, lest the elements gain foothold in the blood." Such was her resolve that the servants dared not protest further. After the 30-minute immersion, Elizabeth would be lifted from the tub by 2 strong attendants and wrapped immediately in a thick woolen blanket lined with silk. She then donned a loose gown of unbleached linen to allow any remaining vinegar scent to evaporate naturally. By midday, the crisp fragrance of rosemary lingered faintly in her chambers, and Elizabeth would receive her midday audiences, her hair perfectly coiffed as if untouched by the steamy ritual. Despite her faith in the practice, not all observers approved. Some whispered that bathing so frequently in vinegar must sting the skin and erode the strength of the natural oils. Indeed, in personal correspondence dated July 14th, 1586, one senior lady-in-waiting noted that Her Majesty's skin, though fair, shows signs of slight reddening after the renewal day. Yet Elizabeth never wavered. She recorded in her private notes that the ritual was a small discomfort for a sovereign's longevity. Thus, while others sought cures in exotic oils or elaborate concoctions, Elizabeth embraced the austere simplicity of vinegar and herbs. For her, the quarterly vinegar bath was more than a hygiene measure. It was a symbolic act of renewal, a private ceremony to cleanse not only her body but also her mind of the ceaseless burdens of rule. In the quiet hush of those steamy mornings, with candles guttering and the world still wearing its blanket of dawn mist, Elizabeth found a moment of solitary clarity, an essential ritual that fortified her for the endless performance that was her reign. Strange habit number 3, wearing the pomander all day. Elizabeth adopted a curious practice in the year 1566 that persisted throughout her reign. She wore a pomander, a small scented ball around her neck at all times. The royal apothecaries prepared these pomanders by filling intricately carved gilt brass spheres, each about 2 inches in diameter, with a mixture of dried petals and spices. Typical ingredients included rose petals, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and grains of paradise, all believed to ward off miasma or poisonous air that was thought to cause disease. Elizabeth's master perfumer maintained a stock of pomanders, each lasting approximately 30 days before needing a refill. On the first of each month, coinciding with the new moon, servants would bring a fresh pomander to the Queen's bedchamber. Elizabeth would remove the previous month's sphere, now darkened from oil absorption and time, and insert the new one into a fine gold chain or chainwork locket she wore beneath her gown. This schedule was recorded meticulously in the Privy Purse expenses. Entries dated the 1st of January, April, July, and October of 1566 list payments of 20 shillings each for pomander repairs and replacements, reflecting the Queen's unwavering commitment. Elizabeth's reliance on the pomander was more than mere superstition. She believed that the constant scent created a protective aura around her, shielding her lungs from foul odours in crowded audiences and damp corridors. Even when the court summer progressed into the stifling heat of July, she refused to loosen her bodice to catch a breeze, preferring the shelter of her fragrant talisman. Those who approached the Queen could distinctly smell a pale hint of rose and clove, an olfactory signature of her presence. Court gossipers often noted that Elizabeth's pomander was never far from sight or sense. When she moved through Whitehall's great halls, some stretching over 100 yards, her ladies would lower their fans discreetly over her shoulder to catch the scent for themselves, believing it carried a measure of the Queen's favour. On the 12th of June, 1585, during a state progress to Norwich, an unsigned letter circulated among the city's merchants praising the Queen's aromatic presence and speculating that the pomander kept plague at bay, a claim that delighted Elizabeth and her medical advisers alike. Remarkably, Elizabeth refused to allow any other perfume near her neck. When foreign ambassadors offered exotic ointments, musk from Persia, ambergris from the Azores, she graciously accepted their gifts, but never applied them. Instead, she kept such bottles sealed in her private cabinet, explaining in a letter dated March 3rd, 1589, that the loyalty of one's nostrils is as solemn as that of one's heart. This vow of olfactory exclusivity reinforced the mystique of her daily ritual and underscored her belief in purity of scent as a bulwark of health and dignity. Personal attendants remembered that if the pomander chain snagged on the high collars of her layered garments or her gown's jewelled trims, Elizabeth would pause her writing or her embroidery, gently untangle it, and stroke the chain with a soft sigh before resuming her task. The action became so habitual that the Queen could restore the sphere to its proper position in less than 3 seconds, a feat one lady-in-waiting timed secretly during a particularly long council session in November of 1592. Even in her final years, when age had thinned her hair and worn creases into her hands, Elizabeth continued to wear her pomander without exception. On the 24th of March, 1603, her last morning, her chamber contained the single scented sphere she had donned the first of that month, its spiced aroma mingling with the chill draught from the open window. She drew a deep breath of its familiar fragrance and allowed herself a brief, contented smile before the day's duties began. Thus, Elizabeth's third strange habit, the unbroken chain of pomanders, served as a constant, fragrant shield. In a world where the air itself was feared to carry death, the Queen cocooned herself in petals and spice, converting an everyday accessory into a personal emblem of resilience. And as she navigated the labyrinth of court intrigue and national peril, her pomander remained the silent sentinel beneath her regal attire, reminding her that even amidst the gravest dangers, a single circle of scent could offer a measure of comfort and control. Strange habit number 4. Reading correspondence backward. Elizabeth cultivated an unusual method for reviewing her personal letters. She read them backward. Beginning in the autumn of 1564, she insisted that every private missive, whether it contained urgent news from her ambassadors in Paris or tender lines from Robert Dudley, be presented to her in reverse order. The royal secretaries complied by transcribing incoming letters on parchment so that the final sentence appeared at the top and the first greeting appeared at the very end. This ritual took place every Wednesday afternoon, shortly after the Queen's high session meetings. At precisely 2:30, 2 clerks would enter her privy chamber bearing a slender ebony tray. On it lay the day's incoming letters, each neatly rolled and tied with crimson ribbon. Elizabeth, seated on her velvet-covered dais, would unwrap the first document, hold it to a candle's flame to darken the text slightly, and then begin her backward reading. Instead of scanning the conventional opening, "Most gracious sovereign," she started with the final valediction, decoding the innermost sentiment before tracing her way to the formal salutation. Court diarists noted that Elizabeth timed herself with the same disciplined precision she applied to her other routines. A small sundial set by her desk marked 30 minutes for each letter. By reading backward, she maintained emotional distance. The comfort of a loyal compliment arrived only after she had processed the formal warnings and strategic requests. In the event of a particularly fraught communication such as dispatches from the Netherlands in July of 1576, detailing Spanish troop movements, she completed the backward reading in exactly 2 minutes, emerging with a calm, measured expression. Physicians and courtiers speculated about the Queen's motive. Some suggested it was a form of mental exercise to hone her memory and cognition. Others whispered that it protected her from immediate emotional reaction. By the time she reached phrases of affection or schemes of betrayal, her mind had already catalogued the key intelligence without being swayed by sentiment. In a realm where a single misread line could spark a conspiracy, Elizabeth preferred this backward decoding as a safeguard against impulsive moves. On the 14th of October, 1579, an envoy from the Papal States delivered a letter in ornate Italian script. As instructed, the Papal Nuncio's secretary penned it as usual, first greeting, body, then farewell, unaware of the Queen's backward routine. When Elizabeth received it, she spent close to 35 minutes unwrapping layers of vellum, scanning the final admonitions before discovering the respectful benediction at the top. By the time she concluded her backward journey, the Nuncio's envoy had been summoned twice and sent away twice, each time finding his Queen unread by the conventional text. Even the Queen's closest companion, Lettice Knollys, Countess of Leicester, found herself caught in this habit. Letters of condolence following her husband's death in March of 1582 were subject to the same reverse scrutiny. Elizabeth reportedly paused before reaching the words, "My dearest cousin," reflecting that by then she had already absorbed the practical implications of the letter's contents, its requests for comfort money, its veiled suggestions of political advantage, before encountering the familiar phrase of familial warmth. This habit extended to her own outgoing correspondence as well. When Elizabeth composed replies, she wrote her closing lines first, leaving the introductory phrases until last. Her secretary, William Cecil, Lord Burghley, would then invert the document again to align with standard presentation before dispatch. This two-step inversion, writing backward and then flipping the letter, made the Queen's handwriting notoriously difficult to forge. For any would-be traitor seeking to mimic her script, the initial reversal added a layer of complexity as confounding as the tower's labyrinthine corridors. By the close of her reign, Elizabeth's backward reading had become legendary within the palace. Even among the hundreds of letters she received each month, ranging from diplomatic dispatches to poems by courtly admirers, none escaped her inverted scrutiny. In the final months of 1602, when infirmity slowed her march into her 70th year, she continued the practice with the help of her secretaries, who would place a single lantern by her bed and supply her with a small handheld mirror so she could read one last missive backward before drifting into fitful sleep. Thus, reading correspondence backward remained Elizabeth's fourth strange habit, a testament to her unwavering vigilance and her ingenious strategies for remaining both emotionally unshakable and intellectually formidable. In the hush of that mirror-lit chamber, each backward scan served as a reminder that in Tudor England, the written word could be as treacherous as any dagger, and only those who mastered its hidden order could claim the crown without falter. Strange habit number 5, the 17-beat laugh. Elizabeth perfected a most peculiar ritual during her audiences. She measured her own laughter by counting exactly 17 beats. This habit took root around the spring of 1576, when she first noticed that spontaneous laughter could betray too much enthusiasm or, worse, impatience. To maintain an aura of measured composure, she began timing her own chuckles with an invisible rhythm, ensuring each ha fell precisely on the 17th pulse of her heart, an organ she believed she could hear more clearly after her morning cold milk and vinegar baths. The practice revealed itself one afternoon in April of 1577. Ambassadors from the Duchy of Savoy arrived with a comedic masque, featuring 6 actors in motley costumes. As the performers stumbled through their verses mocking errant courtiers and clumsy suitors, Elizabeth allowed herself a brief, genuine laugh. Yet she paused mid-giggle, placed a gloved finger on her pulse, and continued only until she reached 17 distinct breaths of amusement. From that moment on, every courtier knew that if they were to elicit the Queen's favour through wit, they had exactly 17 heartbeats to secure approval. Court chroniclers later recorded that during a banquet on the 12th of June, 1582, when the jesters performed an elaborate satire of French court etiquette, Elizabeth laughed 17 times, no more, no less, and then signalled with a subtle nod of her head for them to conclude. Many performers collapsed in relief. Others strained to stretch their gags beyond the limit, only to be gently reined in by a flick of the Queen's fan. The exact count was so ingrained that her master of ceremonies kept a small, discreet tally in the margins of his program book, hidden beneath embroidered ribbons. Physicians speculated that the rule helped Elizabeth maintain control over her emotions, preventing laughter from devolving into boisterous outbursts that might dull her vigilance. They wrote that the 17-beat laugh exercised her diaphragm and heart without exhausting either, a delicate balance for a sovereign already burdened by 70 years of rule. Yet despite their attempts to understand, none could identify how she kept such precise count in moments of amusement. Even in private gatherings, the habit persisted. When Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, shared a witty anecdote on the 18th of September, 1584, Elizabeth's laughter was crisp and measured, each ha falling in sequence until the 17 required beats were complete. Then, with a graceful breath, she reclined back in her velvet chair, the spell broken. Leicester himself once confided to a trusted aide that he timed his wittiest lines to conclude just before the 17th laugh, an art of comedic choreography born of the Queen's strange rule. Interestingly, Elizabeth's 17th laugh often served as a signal of goodwill. Courtiers who witnessed her precise cadence knew they had earned a moment of royal amusement, a rare and coveted reward. It also served as a subtle test. Jesters and diplomats could gauge her satisfaction by observing whether she managed all 17 beats without faltering. If she missed a count often indicated by a fractional hesitation, they felt compelled to withdraw or alter their approach. In her final years, even as infirmity slowed her step and dimmed the sharpness of her wit, Elizabeth continued the ritual. On the 1st of March, 1603, when a young poet recited a new sonnet praising her reign, the Queen summoned all her remaining strength to deliver 17 soft, controlled laughs. The room held its breath at each measured exhalation, as though those 17 pulses bound the very fate of her court. Thus, Elizabeth's 5th strange habit, the 17-beat laugh, became emblematic of her unparalleled self-discipline. In a world where a single misstep of emotion might undo a sovereign's strategy, she chose to confine even her laughter within a precise, almost mathematical framework. And in the gentle rhythm of 17 beats, the Queen reminded all who followed that power, like humour, must be exercised with exacting care. Strange habit number 6. The midday dark nap. Elizabeth maintained a secret reprieve from her burdens each day, exactly at noon, a 1-hour nap in absolute darkness. She began this practice in the summer of 1565, when court physicians warned of evening melancholia caused by unrelenting stress. To counteract this, Elizabeth ordered her servants to prepare a secluded chamber near her private study at Whitehall Palace. At precisely 12 o'clock, announced by the peal of the great bell in St. James's Tower, 2 gentlewomen of her privy bedchamber would approach with solemn quiet. They carried a small ivory lantern, its flame tucked safely within tinted glass, and a silk-lined cushion embroidered with her royal cipher. Before the first week of August, they had already tested the room's shutters, thick oak panels nearly 3 inches thick, designed to block out every shaft of daylight. As the bell tolled 12 times, each chime measured against the pulse in her wrist, the Queen rose from her ornate velvet chair. She removed the heavy velvet gown of the morning, replacing it with a shift of fine Holland linen. Her ladies fastened a simple band of black silk over her eyes, ensuring no stray glow could disturb her repose. Then, with deliberate slowness, Elizabeth lay upon the cushion laid across a low couch, its surface draped in sable fur for warmth. The chamber fell to absolute stillness. Even the tapestries that lined the walls absorbed sound, leaving only the Queen's measured breathing and the distant ticking of a small brass clock on her dressing table. The ivory lantern was extinguished and removed, its smoky scent lingering faintly in the air. For 60 uninterrupted minutes, Elizabeth surrendered to the darkness, allowing her mind to drift free of courtly intrigues and diplomatic dispatches. On the 14th of August, 1587, during a particularly sweltering heatwave, winter's ash-grey clouds gave way to unrelenting Sunday. Courtiers commented on the unusual stillness of the palace at midday. Yet Elizabeth, clad in the simple linen shift, slept on, her accustomed dark hour undisturbed by fanfare or importunate knocks. At precisely 1 o'clock, the shutters were opened again, and the amber daylight crept back into the chamber. The 2 gentlewomen softly stirred her back to wakefulness, assisting her return to the heavy brocade robes awaiting her outside. Medical scribes noted that after the nap, Her Majesty's complexion took on a faint luminosity, an almost imperceptible glow that some likened to moonlight on water. She reported feeling as though the lids of her mind had been unsealed, ready to tackle the remainder of the day's audiences without the weariness that plagued lesser nobles. Indeed, her afternoon audiences often began at a brisk 2 o'clock, sharp and decisive in tone, as though Elizabeth carried a reservoir of renewed energy brimming beneath her composed exterior. Courtiers whispered that the Queen's midday dark nap was her most well-guarded secret. Envoys from France and Spain, accustomed to deferential silence, came away convinced that Elizabeth's vitality was supernatural. They marvelled at her clear gaze and firm step at court levee 2 hours later, unaware that she had just emerged from an hour in utter blackness. Even in her later years, when infirmity tempered her movements, Elizabeth never abandoned the practice. On the 31st of October, 1602, despite a chilling autumn wind rattling the palace windows, she requested her dark chamber be prepared as usual. The court marvelled at her tenacity. Physicians, dismissing it as quirk, nonetheless recorded that her habitual 1-hour nap in darkness correlated with fewer bouts of insomnia than most ladies of her age. Thus, the midday dark nap remained Elizabeth's 6th strange habit, a silent ritual of renewal hidden behind the crown's dazzling pageantry. In that precise hour of darkness, she found a private sanctuary from the ceaseless demands of sovereignty, reminding herself that even the most unassailable queen required a moment's rest in the quiet void. And so we come to the gentle close of Queen Elizabeth's remarkable journey, a story woven from the softest silks of history and the quietest whispers of personal habit. There is no thunderous finale, no triumphant fanfare to punctuate this final scene, only the hushed rustle of tapestries, the faint echo of a single candle guttering, and the slow, steady breath of a sovereign who once carried the weight of a nation upon her shoulders. As we slip back from the polished court masks and the carefully rehearsed performances, we remember that even the greatest power must finally yield to rest. Elizabeth's life, full of intrigue and resolve, also teaches us the value of small rituals, those simple, human moments of quiet care that allow us to gather strength for whatever challenges lie ahead. Whether it was a cup of cold morning milk, a bath of scented vinegar, or a hidden hour of darkness, each habit reminds us that renewal often lives in the smallest acts of self-compassion. Let this story's gentle cadence reassure you that, in our own lives, amid the noise and urgency, we too can find solace in private rituals that soothe the spirit and steady the heart. The greatest empires may rise and fall, but the care we show ourselves endures, shaping not only our days, but the legacy we leave behind. Imagine now the candle's flame growing ever softer, its light spreading like a whisper across the cool marble floor. Picture the Queen's chamber fading into a tranquil hush, the velvet curtains drawn closed, and in that enveloping calm, allow your own mind to soften at the edges. Let the steady rhythm of your breath be a gentle drum calling you toward rest, guiding you away from the cares of the day and toward the open arms of sleep. May the message of Elizabeth's life linger as a quiet promise, that true strength is born of both resilience and tenderness, that even amid storm and spectacle, we carry within us a well of peace, waiting to be drawn upon. And now, dear listener, as the final embers of our story settle into the night, I wish you the sweetest of dreams. Thank you for joining me. If you have found comfort in this gentle tale, please subscribe to our channel for more soft stories and whispered histories. Good night, and sleep well.